Welcome back to Gospel Walk. Today we are examining a critical concept from Christ Academy's Systematic Theology series, specifically within the study of theology proper. We are answering a question that confronts all of us eventually. Is God actually in control when the terrifying diagnosis arrives, when a relationship fractures, or when the future goes blank? The biblical answer to that uncertainty is the doctrine of providence. This is not a concept about a cold, abstract machine, and it is not blind fatalism. It is the reality of God's continual, personal, and powerful care over everything He has made. To accurately grasp this, we have to distinguish providence from creation. Creation tells us that God made the world. Providence tells us that He still runs it. Look at this comparison. On the left is the deistic assumption, a mechanical universe wound up by a distant creator and left to lose momentum. On the right is the biblical reality of divine governance, a continuous, active network where every node is purposefully managed. Shifting our worldview from a dying, mechanical cosmos to an actively managed system changes how we interact with reality. It proves we are not abandoned. This active management operates through a three-part architectural framework. The first mechanism is preservation. God did not build the universe like a toy, wind it up and walk away to let it run on autopilot. According to the texts of Hebrews 1 and Colossians 1, the entire cosmos is actively held together right now by the word of His power. Observe this tension in physical realities. Planetary orbits are not driven by mere inertia, and your next heartbeat is not an automatic biological guarantee. Because physical life continues moment by moment solely through God's active sustaining power, we are stripped of the illusion that we are self-existent. That realization requires profound humility. The second pillar in this architectural framework is governance. In Matthew 10, Jesus establishes that this governing authority reaches down to microscopic, seemingly insignificant details. Not even a single sparrow falls to the ground apart from the Father's will. If He dictates the fate of a sparrow, that exact same authority scales up to the macroscopic level, driving the rise and fall of global human empires and their leaders. Ephesians 1 defines the absolute scope of this control, stating God works all things according to the counsel of His will. The word all is comprehensive. It includes the difficult and the painful, not merely the pleasant. Therefore, human history is not an anxious, out-of-control chain of random events. It is a highly governed script where every detail is purposefully directed. We complete the framework with a third pillar, which is where abstract theology meets the harsh friction of historical reality, redemption. We can see how this operates in real time by tracking the historical case study of Joseph. Joseph's early biography reads like a compounding disaster. He experiences violent betrayal by his brothers, human trafficking, a devastating false accusation, and years abandoned in a foreign prison. But years later, he is suddenly elevated to second in command over Egypt. The pit was actually a pathway, and the prison was a deliberate preparation for leadership. Standing before his brothers, Joseph articulates a concept we call the concurrency of agency. He says, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." A single historical event simultaneously held two conflicting intentions. Look at how these two parallel forces operate over the same timeline. The bottom track represents real human cruelty. The overarching top track is divine preservation, visibly steering that cruelty toward a specific redemptive destination. God is never the author of sin. He does not excuse the evil. But His providence is so utterly sovereign that He overrules human wickedness to guarantee a redemptive outcome. We must now test this framework against situations where God appears completely silent or absent. We find a perfect test case in the book of Esther. Esther contains a unique textual anomaly. It is the only book in the biblical canon that never explicitly mentions God's name. Yet the narrative is driven by an extreme chain of apparent coincidences. A plot to assassinate the king is accidentally overheard. Esther happens to win a royal beauty contest. A wicked official's rage peaks on the exact night the king suffers from sudden insomnia. The principle here is that providence frequently operates in disguise. God does not require overt miracles to exercise His power. He seamlessly utilizes ordinary palace bureaucracy and what the world calls blind chance. But what happens when the circumstances are not just quiet, but violently chaotic? Consider the Apostle Paul's narrative in Acts chapter 27. Look at this reality. Paul is a prisoner, trapped in the dark on a wooden ship during a 14-day hurricane. The sailors despair, the soldiers plan to execute the prisoners, and every human indicator points to total disaster. Yet in his letter to the Philippians, Paul offers a radical interpretation of his own suffering. He states that these exact, horrifying interruptions were the ordained mechanism to advance the gospel into the center of the Roman Empire. Providence is rarely the miraculous removal of the storm. Instead, it is the absolute promise of God's purposeful presence inside our most inconvenient and painful realities. This leaves us with a critical question to answer. If God governs everything from the beginning to the end, does human action actually matter? Belief in absolute divine governance is the opposite of karma or blind fate. It is never an excuse to fold our arms and do nothing. The paradox is that because God governs the final outcomes, believers are actually freed. We are emboldened to work diligently, to plan carefully, and pray boldly, completely insulated from the fear of ultimate failure. When confronting real trauma, we have to carefully define what Romans 8:28 actually says. Scripture never calls things like cancer, betrayal, or depression good. The promise is that God works all things together for good. That means we trust Him through the evil. We are never required to thank Him for the evil itself. As we look at the chaotic, tangled threads of our own lives, Isaiah 55 reminds us of a lingering mystery. We are not promised the ability to understand how all these knots connect on this side of eternity. But even when the present looks like a tangled disaster, we can rest today. We can rest in uncertainty, knowing that the weaver of the tapestry is entirely good, entirely wise, and entirely sovereign.